Okay, welcome to today's discussion and warmly welcome everyone. From our three guests here. I'm Bailin, and I'm an independent journalist and writer and a very close friend of One Way Street Journal. And I'm here because I am invited to be your guest host today to discuss our new topic. And before we start, please allow me to introduce some information about this event. Last month on April the 13th, the first international literary round of New Voice was held by Lisa, the editor of the Stinging Fly magazine in Ireland, Matteo, founder of Specimen from Switzerland, and Wu Qi, chief editor of One Way Street Journal of China. And they brought with them the current state of literature in their countries and the new voices they found in their project and the joy of working together across the ocean. And today, here is the New Voice second round, literary round, and we are going to talk about this very interesting and profound topic about where to search for truer stories. And we invited three guests here. They are journalist and writer Oscar Schwartz from Australia, Wan Jerry from Africa. She is journalist, essayist, and filmmaker. And Roisin Kimbert from Ireland. She has written essays and features for the Stinging Fly. So first of all, please introduce yourself briefly in turn. Thank you. So we can start from this order or from Oscar Schwartz. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and nice to meet you all. My name is Oscar Schwartz, and I am speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respect to their elders past and present. So I am a freelance journalist and writer. My background is in academia, but then I started kind of pivoting more towards doing freelance journalism around 2018. I generally write kind of long form magazine stories as my, to get paid. And then I also write for some literary journals. I wrote for Heat magazine, which is edited by Alexandra Christie, which is why I'm here today. And I kind of work across a bunch of different genres. So I'm also working on a novel that kind of straddles the boundary between nonfiction and fiction. And I write a newsletter with some friends here in Melbourne that is kind of focusing on reportage and cultural criticism. So yeah, that's what I'm up to.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So how about you, Wanjari?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Nairobi. My name is Wanjeri Gakuru. I'm a member of Jalada Africa, a Pan-African Writers Collective, which is kind of why I'm also part of the conversation. But my primary training is in journalism. I've been a journalist for about 8 years now, feels longer. But it's been really, really wonderful. I've focused on magazine journalism, especially arts and culture journalism. But I've also been writing essays. I have recently become a curator of films, which has been very exciting, and as well as a director and writer. I'm really interested in this conversation because creative nonfiction is something that I really, really enjoy. And I feel like it pulls the best of the academic training that I have in journalism and the love for fiction and the creative elements within that. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So how about you, Roisin?
Hi
Please
there.
introduce yourself. Yeah.
I'm Roisin Kuipert, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And it's such an interesting subject. This question of where to find truer stories is one that's always on my mind. I'm the author of a book that came out in 2021 called The Disconnect, A Personal Journey Through the Internet. It's a book, but it's also a collection of essays. They're a sort of hybrid of personal essay or memoir and cultural criticism. And oh, and I didn't mention I'm Irish, and I'm currently in Berlin, where it's the morning. City full of Irish people. I worked for places like, I've written in the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, the New York Times. I was a columnist for Vice's technology website for years, which was kind of what led me onto this subject of online life and the intersection between life and culture. And I'm currently a lecturer in creative writing, mainly creative nonfiction at the University of Galway.
Okay. Thank you for all of you sharing your personal information about yourself. So let's get started with today's interesting discussion, right? Okay, before start, our first question would be, quite serious topic. As a nonfiction creator, you can share with us the issues you focus on in your nonfiction writing in your area. And what is your favorite work of nonfiction writing and why? And before that, I can just start a discussion because I thought, like I mentioned, I'm also a freelancer journalist and a writer, and I mainly focus on the historical and cultural issues of the South Slavic people in the Balkans. So the disorder of the former Yugoslavia is a topic of concern to me. And my concern is that in the post-Yugoslav era, how do ordinary people rebuild their daily lives? And how do they re-establish their identity? So this is the topic I concern. And speaking of that, as for me, the most the masterpiece of nonfiction writing for me is the English female writer, if you know, Rebecca West. It's her masterpiece called Black Lamp and Grey Falcon. And this masterpiece is a huge book. It contains about 600 years of history and cultural things of the Balkans. And for me, this is a book full of passionate opinions, and it's also insightful. And maybe the most important to me is that West she is never afraid to show her opinions and values in her books. And though this book is a travelogue, but it goes beyond that. I mean, it is a product that combines the thickness of history and with the complexity of the present situations. So here is my masterpiece, of nonfiction writing and why. So as a start, I make this brief introduction. So please share with us your favorite and why. Okay. So who would like to be the first? Oh, don't be too shy.
Sure, I can go ahead.
Okay.
So
Good.
primarily my work now focuses on nostalgia, memory, social justice, gender parity, and the human condition. And the reason why it's so broad ranging is because I work in different media, and I find that these are kind of the things that perhaps one media is stronger in expressing one certain idea, but these are generally the ideas that I like. But the text that I really, really love is, and I picked it because I currently have a cold. It's called Frank Sinatra Has a Cold by Gay Talese. And it's considered one of the early examples of what was then called the new journalism. It came out in 1966 and 1965, I can't quite remember. And it was a profile on the singer. And it had actually been a commissioned piece. And the day the journalist arrived, now Gay Talese, Frank did not want to speak to him at all because he wasn't feeling well. And so what he ended up doing is speaking to everybody around him. So the singers, the hanger-ons, his crew, his friends, and kind of writing this really beautiful piece that was rich in description, vivid. The sentences were singing. It was quite wonderful. And actually it marked the progression in what now we call creative nonfiction. So that's why I like it, because sometimes I go back to it just for the music of the language, just to kind of remind me that it can be joyful, writing these things that can essentially in one way be kind of very dry, because the training of journalism is very serious and stoic and very matter of fact, but there's really opportunity for music and beauty in the writing.
Okay, so what is your main focus, the main issues you focus on of your nonfiction writing? What are the issues focus on? You most focus on?
Oh, the issues that I focus in are nostalgia, memory, social justice, gender parity, and the human condition.
Oh, lots of topics.
It's a lot, yeah. Yeah, like I said, like it's quite a broad-ranging series of topics, but it's because I work in multiple media, so I'm able to explore them in different ways. But it seems like when I look at my work, in retrospect, I feel like those are the ideas that are most appealing to me and are kind of evident in my work.
Wow, impressive. So how about you guys, you both? Shua? Oscar, can you share?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for me, it depends on what I'm working on. If it's a piece of journalism, then generally, historically, what I've worked on is stories that kind of intersect science and identity. So if there is some topic within, or some scientist or some issue within the broader scientific world, I know that's extremely broad, that raises the question of who are we, who am I? So like the way that science raises questions of identity. That's been my kind of focus historically, and how I got my start in long form journalism. I guess it's maybe because my background in academia was through literary studies, and my research question was concerning algorithmically generated poetry, which at the time when I was doing it was not as kind of well known and popular as it is now. The thing that drew me to that question was that it was a scientific question that raised questions about who are we, what does it mean to be human, and so on. But kind of since I've become a little bit more established in my career, I have found that I've tended less to have expertise in a specific topic and more just followed my nose. And often I find my next story while I'm reporting the story that I'm currently working on, and whatever happens to like catch my attention, whatever I'm interested in, that's what I'll go with. Something that I really like about this work, or really love about this work, is that it allows you to become utterly obsessed with something for a few months, and then drop it and then move on to the next thing. And that really appeals to me. That's my journalism work. In terms of my kind of creative nonfiction, what I'm really interested in, and what has always compelled me as a reader, is the presentation of life, the carefully constructed recording of life, that might seem like it's just someone's journal, but when you read it, offers profound insights into the human condition. That's kind of what I'm interested in as a reader of creative nonfiction. And I think that the great master of that is the Australian writer Helen Garner. She has 3 volumes of her diaries, and I think that for me, they are masterpieces and something that I just return to and read over and over again. So in terms of my, like, the tome that I go back to, it's Helen Garner's diaries.
So why you think her works of diaries is a masterpiece?
Why do I think? It's a good question.
Good question or good question? Yeah,
it's a good question. I think to begin, she's just a brilliant writer, and so it's delightful to have a glimpse into her mind. And she is a keen observer of the human condition and merciless with herself. So all of her vanities and all of her falseness, she doesn't shy away from, and she presents it to you in a way that is extremely courageous, and sometimes terrifying. So she doesn't look away from the things that probably bring most people the most shame about themselves. And I think for me, that's a very admirable trait in nonfiction writer.
Well, thank you. Impressive. Thank you. So how about you, Rosin? Please share with us your opinion.
Yeah. So firstly, what do I write about? I write about the internet, but specifically what I wanted to do was tell the human story of life with the internet now. And maybe you guys will relate to this, but when you're a journalist, I mean, absolutely, like what Oscar just said there, I love the fact that it can feed your obsessions, that you're able to just go really deep into a subject and then drop it and move on to something else and reach some kind of perspective on it. But also spending years as a journalist got me thinking that what was I not getting to tell? And specifically, something that really struck me was ambiguity and ambivalence in these issues I was writing about, specifically in my relationship to the internet and how it was affecting life all around me. And I get these, you know, when you write a news story, you're always looking for some scientific study to back up the point you're making. And you can kind of find a study to say anything if you look hard enough, I suspect. But I'd always see, you know, the internet is affecting girls, you know, or it's giving people insomnia, or it's making people depressed. And yes, the internet was making me depressed. It was making me extremely depressed. The book starts in 2016, and I spent a whole year just studying conflict and like the rise of the alt-right and truly awful stuff. And it was really bringing me down. And then I reached a kind of crisis point, but that was the beginning of my book in the end. The book was an attempt to sort of ask, has anyone else had these feelings too? And the beauty of the essay form, which it's comprised of, is that it allows you to reach a kind of clarity that you might not have in everyday life. And it allows you to unravel these webs of connections. Sound like some kind of conspiracy theorist, but there's a way to do it that's, you know, it's thoughtful. It's a kind of slow thinking as opposed to the very fast thinking of journalism. The time frame is wildly different. And it allowed me to explore the kind of nuances of all of these issues all around me, things like identity, work, the body, relationships. There's an essay in my book called Tamagotchi Girls that basically posits that to fall in love with someone over the internet is like having a Tamagotchi, but also becoming someone else's Tamagotchi pet. And then, so the second question, what works of nonfiction do I look? Sorry, I'm going to go on and say two, but I'll make it really fast. Two that had an enormous influence on me were Ghosts of My Life by Mark Fisher, which is a work of cultural criticism, but it's also about music, and it's left-wing cultural criticism. But he begins it by basically saying like he was very depressed when he wrote this book. But rather than that limiting his perspective and his argument that culture is recycling itself and that we're retreating into nostalgia, he finds a kind of bridge between his thinking and that of maybe the whole of the world around him. And he maps that out onto culture, and he makes some really convincing arguments in a very interesting, thoughtful way. That book just changed my mind about what like criticism could be. I was used to really stodgy, boring stuff, and this was something so alive. The other one is The Empathy Exams by Leslie Jameson, who I really feel is the most ripped off writer out there. As someone who I read for The Singing Fly, I read submissions occasionally, and I teach. And I think people who've maybe never read her, but they're still actually copying her style. And it's all about that ambivalence, that ambiguity. My favorite is The Devil's Bait, where it's an essay about this disease, which may or may not be real. But she affords a real dignity, but also curiosity. You know, she approaches it, but she affords dignity to the people who are suffering. I mean, the book is all about pain and how we understand it. Anyway, that's my long rambling answer.
So we just talk about the issues you focus on in your nonfiction writing and the favorite masterpiece of your area and the reason. Next question will be more serious. I mean, because I to be honest, I don't like. I don't like this question at all. Sorry. This question is about extent observations on the state of nonfiction writing in your countries. But to be frank, I think I'm a writer, I'm an independent writer. I'm an individual, so I cannot talk about the state of nonfiction writing in my country because alone I'm an individual. So I can only share my personal view of this area, of this situation. I cannot stand on behalf of the whole country. you know. So as for you, I think you can just share your own experience, your own opinions about this topic. And according to my personal observation, I have to say, the development of nonfiction writing in China nowadays is recently new, and maybe does not have the mature tradition that it does in the Western world. So it's true. I think it's true. Now I detect some trend that worries me a little. I mean, a tendency to confuse news writing with nonfiction writing. You know, the difference between these areas is becoming smaller. Yes, I think it's a tendency in this area. So please share your opinions in your countries, of course, on behalf of yourself. Thank you. Okay, Wanjeri, you can go first since you smile so brightly.
Oh, wow. That named by the smile. Well, I found a really interesting article about kind of contextualizing writing on the continent, and I thought it'd be a good way to kind of create a context in which I would like to make my argument of sorts. So the written word in Africa has roots in the early civilizations of the Nile Valley and the Western and coastal Eastern Africa. During the Middle Ages, religious centers spread the written word. Monasteries in Christian Ethiopia produced illustrated scripts in Gears. In the Western Sudan, Jin and Timbuktu, important trading posts and Islamic study centers house the oldest libraries and universities in sub-Saharan Africa. And in the 17th and 18th centuries, royal scripts in Arabic were produced in the Swahili East Coast and Madagascar. Printed books became widespread in Africa with the arrival of European missionaries, primarily for purposes of religious conversion, heralding the advent of colonialism. But these days, Africa, which has 15% of the world's population, produces less than 2% of the world's books. So issues such as purchasing power, lack of purchasing power, low literacy, particularly in the Eastern European languages in which publishing is concentrated currently, issues such as weak distribution systems and the collapse of public libraries across the continent has made access to published texts quite difficult. In fact, the kind of nonfiction that is doing well presently across the continent is the publishing of textbooks, which is quite disheartening because, I mean, as much as it is quite good because it's curriculum-focused text and it's used in classrooms in primary and secondary school, it's not the joyful journalism that we're discussing kind of in this conversation. So what I've found to be quite interesting is that there's been an increase in academic texts, scientific journals, autobiographies, and memoirs. So at least the last two are kind of, there's some creative nonfiction work happening there. But what has been so interesting, and we were discussing this a little bit earlier, is the explosion of the personal essay. And for me, the space in which this has taken space that's most interesting for me is in blogging, because that is a space where there's no gatekeeping. You're kind of able to present your ideas as you imagine them. Well, hopefully you've read either some work or gotten some training, and so you're able to do it in a really good way. But I really love that people are blogging. And what's interesting, for example, just to give context, so in Kenya, we have 4 newspapers, but we have about 35,000 blogs or 35,000 bloggers, which for me kind of says that that's a space where things are going. We're kind of shifting away from the traditional publishing and the limitations within that and embracing what the internet has to offer. And so for me, I think the state where we are in now, the internet is what is presenting so many possibilities. There are lots of journals accepting work, accepting personal essays or essays of any type, more long form journalism, so long profiles and things like that. So we have publications like Debunk Media, we have The Elephant in Nairobi, we have Chimurenga in South Africa, and they're doing a really interesting work around reclaiming the narrative for themselves and presenting themselves as the protagonists of their own stories, you know, pushing back against ideas of what Africans or what Kenyans are supposed to be. And so that for me is what is most interesting, that we have this really rich history that was interrupted by colonialism. And now the internet is presenting really fantastic possibilities of reshaping the narrative in the way that we want to see it. Yeah.
Well, interesting and profounding, I think. Okay, so who is next? So you're very shy. Okay, I just order your name. So maybe Racine, you first. Okay, lady first.
Yes, Oscar, you go last. No, yeah, you know what? Being away from Ireland, which I currently am, I'm in Berlin, as are so many other Irish people. You see them everywhere. But it really makes me realize how lucky we are. We have such a healthy journal scene, and it's a funny one because and I think a lot of others have had this experience. I had to get published as a journalist abroad before I could get published in Irish media. A little bit, like I got published a little at the start, but it took a long time, and there were many endless internships, and a lot of businesses going bankrupt as well. It was during the crash, I remember. Magazines were still trying to cope with online, but once I started, years and years later, I always knew I wanted to do literary writing. And once I started applying to the journals and getting published there, things changed very quickly. And I know a lot of other writers in Ireland have this experience where agents read them, they reach an international audience. So like I'm kind of here representing the Stinging Fly, and they had a transformative effect on my life as a writer. They published an essay by me called Bland God, Notes on Mark Zuckerberg. And it was everything that I couldn't do as a journalist. It was weird. It was like a kind of semiotic analysis of like Zuckerberg and normcore and hoodies and what Facebook was doing to both my life and everyone else's. And then it was really eye-opening for me too. The other place is Dublin Review, which has been going for a very long time. And they put out a book last year called earlier this year, started this year, called Show Your Work, which is a compilation of all of their stuff. The Stinging Fly is a publisher too. So they to me are the kind of like granddads of the whole thing. Not like they're old and outdated, but just they're the godfathers of fostering this scene of both established writers, also a lot of up and coming writers. And they've been so good for nonfiction. They, the remit is kind of quite open. The Dublin Review would be personal essays, but they're kind of long form, proper literary personal essays, or they're essays on impersonal subjects as well, but mostly personal. On The Stinging Fly, kind of anything goes as long as it's good. And that has spawned this other generation of younger journals. Like we have, God, ones I've written for recently, Paper Visual Art, which is it's art, but it's kind of experimental too. The Pig's Back, which is based up in Northern Ireland. Winter Papers, and there's even one explicitly asking for experimental nonfiction, or what they call promiscuous nonfiction, Talca magazine. So when you see that that's out there in the world, it's like an invitation to just push boundaries and experiment and really get to find your voice and your kind of just your world as a writer. And I don't know if I could have done like the essays that became my book. I couldn't really have written that book were it not for these journals. And when you hear about, Ireland contributes so much on the world stage in terms of literature. I mean, I was on the phone to my mom a day ago, and she was like, "Oh, the Americans they're flooding into Dublin to celebrate Bloomsday. It's already kicking off, and it's not even June." But that kind of has a knock-on effect. The Arts Council funds writing; they fund these journals. There's a lot of interdisciplinary stuff going on with people working in other mediums too. I think, for all that's wrong with Ireland right now, and that includes things like a housing crisis, and a lot of young artists can't afford to live in Ireland, let alone Dublin. But at the same time, these journals and small publishers, and then bigger ones too, but they're affording opportunities for a kind of writing that might not flourish otherwise. And I think that is all, just kind of to come back to the themes that we're discussing, that is also factoring in political change. And we're a very online culture. We had 2 not so long ago referendums for gay marriage and the 8th Amendment. And a lot of that happened because of our online culture. But it's also a written culture. It's one where people read a lot and they value books as part of Irish identity. And that's putting nonfiction writing, I think, in a really good place.
Yeah, it's good for hear that. So how about you, Oscar? You must prepare a lot because you have enough time.
Yes. So similar to what Roisin was saying about Ireland, Australia does have a rich journal culture for sure. There's a lot of literary journals, and I know for me, sorry, my cat's just wants to get in on the action. You know, when I was coming up as a literature student at university, there was a number of magazines and journals that were boundary pushing, open to experimentation, run by young people, that, you know, published my first essays, and it was just so exciting to be published and see your name in print and meet all these cool people that were doing something similar to you. The difference is in relation to Australia and Ireland is that my feeling was, as a young person, that I wasn't getting read anywhere outside of Australia. Now that I'm a little bit older and I see the value of like literary community, no matter what the size is, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But as a young person, I just desperately wanted to find a larger audience. And I think that's what made me start writing online more. I was a big blogger, and ended up kind of finding a literary community that was much more based online internationally than one that was kind of journal focused and specific to Melbourne, which is the city where I'm from. And that's kind of, yeah, I think that is I can be critical of Australian culture more broadly, in that it can be kind of inward looking and a little parochial, and it doesn't seem to push itself out into the world in the same way that I kind of would like it to at times. Which is part of the reason why I left. I lived in New York for a number of years. I'm back now, but it is a vibrant scene, but it's, I would say, fairly insular. Not to say that there's not really great stuff that's being done. A lot of these journals are publishing really excellent work. It's just the view can be a little bit Australian oriented or something. A little bit of island syndrome, I guess. Island, not island with an R, island with an S.
Well, okay, thank you. Thank you. So after we talking so much about the topic of nonfiction writing, so we can focus on the essence of this today's topic, because my next question will be about the how to say it, about, please share your own understanding of nonfiction writing. Yeah, the question seems quite simple, but the answer can be quite difficult, because as I said, I believe that nonfiction writing should not send borders. I mean, should not send boundaries, and should not separate perceptions of one's own life from social issues. So they cannot be separated from each other. And you know, there is an old saying that from one small clue, one can see what is coming. So there is always a story in every detail. So at the same time, we should distinguish the difference between between news writing, like I said, between news writing and the nonfiction writing, because we are independent writers. So we should not be afraid to show our own positions, our values, ideas, and we should, I think, fully demonstrate with facts for this expression of such values, because that's just as I said, just like I mentioned, the tendency, you remember, the tendency that to confuse news writing with nonfiction writing, because all of these writings, I think, we seem to be obsessed with writing about individual experience, about some kind of seeking novelty, but we just lack the ability to extract or to realize, to extract the ideas or the truths from personal experience. So I think this may be the task for nonfiction writing. So how about your understanding of your own nonfiction writing? Yeah, maybe it's kind of conceptual. So let's do it slower. Yeah. So who will be the first? Because this question.
I'm happy to jump. I'm happy to jump in for this one.
Okay.
Just a very simple question. I think it depends on what. Yeah, well, it depends on what type of nonfiction writing you're doing. But there's a story that I always remember in relation to this kind of question of nonfiction writing and what its relationship to truth and the world is. It's the American nonfiction writer Hunter S. Thompson. I can't remember. He wrote a book called Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, which was following the campaign of, I just need to look it up quickly. Anyway, it was one of the Democratic candidates for the US presidency in the 70s. And he wrote this book. He followed the campaign, he reported, he wrote the book. And then the candidate was asked, what do you think of Hunter Thompson's book about the election? And he said it was the least factual and the most accurate book written about the election, which to me is like kind of points to something that I see as interesting and tricky about nonfiction writing, if you're distinguishing it from news writing. So news writing obviously has to be factual. Nonfiction writing gives you the opportunity to be to find ways of being accurate and come at the truth that doesn't necessarily rely on facts in the same way that news writing might. So, and the writing that I'm always find appealing as a reader seems to be the most accurate and the least factual nonfiction writing. So yeah, that's how I would frame it.
Wow, good answer. I like it. So how about you guys?
Yeah, just to jump off of that, I always say that it's easier for me to embellish the truth than to tell outright lies, which is what I feel like fiction is. And not to say that fiction is truly a collection of lies, but it feels like it comes so much from imagination, the way that creative nonfiction doesn't do it, but it borrows some elements from it. And so I feel like I am building on a truth that exists. And that's what I enjoy about creative nonfiction. This was most apparent to me, and I like what he says about depends on the project. So in my regular arts and culture journalism work, it's kind of an expectation where you're kind of marrying both sides. But in 2016, I believe, I could be wrong, 2017, 2016, I was commissioned to write a profile on a Kenyan band called Just a Band. And they're an incredible group. In fact, they have just come back from a 6-year hiatus. So we're all just very pleased. And we're putting together a book about their journey together as artists. And they were already such an experimental, eclectic, fusion of sound kind of group that was merging film and music and art and making something really incredible and special. So I knew writing about them, I had to kind of mimic their style, mimic their approach. And what was so enjoyable about that is that they give me so much space to imagine and write the facts and make up conversations that kind of happen. Ask them if they remember things. If they didn't remember, I asked them, how could it have gone if you could remember the words, those kind of things. And I found that kind of work so wonderful, and it was very, very collaborative with them. And in the end, what was actually published became something that I'm very proud of having done, because I feel like I flexed all my creative muscles while also still making sure that, chronologically I was correct in the journey that they had taken, but I was able to have a lot of fun with the text. So that's what I enjoy so much about creative nonfiction. It's the best of both worlds. And also I went to a workshop once where they were being taught fiction and nonfiction, and I scored so poorly in fiction. I was like, you know what? I think I know where my heart is. I think I know where my skills are. Let me just focus on the creative nonfiction. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Good answer. So how about you, Roisin?
The kind of ethical questions and the question of truth always fascinate me. Like I literally on the table beside me have the journalist and the murderer.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, it's a hoot. And I mean, I always teach in cold blood. And I always try to get them to read a good. I always want to do the end with the execution and the scene on death row. And then afterwards, I'm just kind of like to the students, right, have at it. Let's have a fight. Let's have an argument about this. Like, but it fascinates me. I mean, in the context of essay writing, which is what I've always done, writing nonfiction, I feel like my guide, the kind of safe refuge I go back to, is this definition of like, well, this line from Montaigne, like the originator of the essay, of saying, you know, I know nothing. And essay, you know, to try. You're trying to understand. Now that demands a kind of rigor and honesty of the writer, which you can't always assume. But personally, that's, in a sense, that's the fun of writing essays for me. I'm not a decisive person. In fact, I'm a double Pisces, which to some people will understand. No, I don't even know if I believe in astrology, which is exactly what a double Pisces would say. But like, you know, everything is so unstable in everyday life. It's changing. You're hearing all these perspectives. But in writing, provided the spirit is right, it's not that different to fiction, I think, as it is with nonfiction. You just have to go about it in as honest a way as you can possibly have. And I really do believe that a clarity and an honesty and a perspective is available to us as writers that isn't available to us in everyday life. Now, to like bring that into the definition of what nonfiction, creative nonfiction is, as opposed to news writing, I think it should also have some kind of aesthetic merit. And I think for too long, like when I was researching my book, I read all these tech books. And some of them were just so boring. And formally, the internet is this wild written culture, you know, hypertext, strange linguistic tics, memes, language changing in all these strange, brave new ways. I think nonfiction can afford to take inspiration from its subject. Form is this big fixation for me, and form is where the aesthetic pleasure comes in. So every time, it almost feels like there's this challenge. You can just reinvent the form and it's still an essay if that spirit of understanding is still there. How that maps onto longer form nonfiction, I mean, I think it's the same but longer, but obviously issues arise, as we see from Truman Capote.
Well, thank you. So I just wondering that I want to know three of you. What are you? I mean, at the moment now, what are you working on? I mean, what is your writing? The content of your writing right now? I'm curious about that. Can you share with us? Okay. Who would jump first? Like I was wondering what other writers is writing about. So what are you writing about right now at the moment? What topic?
Well, I'm currently writing an essay about the public transport, public commuter train system. It was introduced a couple of years ago, and it's been so revolutionary in how we are traveling, because public transport systems in my country have been primarily the public buses. They're called matatus, and it's a very rogue system, and it has its own culture. It's wonderful in many ways, but also really strange in other ways, and troubling, especially if you're a young woman in public transport. There are just some questions around your safety. So what the train system has provided is this reliable, safe, clean, really different experience. And there are parts where what I'm curious about is, on one hand, it's really wonderful in that regard. On the other hand, I'm curious about where the track, where the train stops, where the stations are located, why it doesn't have certain stops in particular parts on the journey. What does that say about the choices of, who has access to the train? The train system is about 40 shillings, which is, what is that even equivalent in all the currencies? It's very little money. Just know it's very, very cheap, very, very affordable. But then I'm always looking out of the train and seeing people, children especially, watching the train, being excited to see the train, but never having access to the train, because even if they did, it would never stop at their stop. It's not something they can access. So I'm really interested in writing that piece on one side as this enjoyable transportation network, but also like the deeper questions about who does it serve and why were those choices made.
Well, it's good topic, good assets. Hope you can finish it. Are you finished it? just working on that. Okay.
No,
So-
still working, still working. My editor is just very angry at me, but we shall figure it out.
Okay. So how about you? How about you, Oscar? What are you writing about right now?
Yeah, I'm just at the very beginning of a project, and it's one of those things where I'm like, I have no idea what I'm writing about, even though I know
Okay.
what I'm writing about. I have this very broad remit from an editor to write about Aeolian harps. I don't know if you've heard of them before. They're wind harps that they were very popular in the 18th and 19th century, and they're like a little contraption that you put in your window and you close the door, and then wind comes through and it interacts with strings and makes music. So it's kind of like a speaker system that created ambient music for people's houses in the 19th and 18th century. They were also, these harps became the subject, became like a kind of central metaphor for romantic poets. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Percy Bysshe Shelley and William Wordsworth all wrote poems and treatises about the Aeolian harp, which they felt was an apt metaphor for the way that poets work. So they're kind of these contraptions that take in inspiration from the world, and out comes poetry. So I need to write an essay about the Aeolian harp, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it in a way that isn't just dull and like a historical retelling of what they are, where they come from. So today I was thinking about this question, and I reached out to there's one person in Australia that seems to make and sell Aeolian harp still, who happens to live a 4.5 hour drive away from me down the coast. So I sent him an email and asked him if I could come and visit him, listen to the Aeolian harp. And he hasn't written back yet. But when I was looking at on the map where he happens to be right next to Victoria, which is the state where I'm from, biggest wind farm. So there's giant windmills and wind turbines there. So I think there's something there about wind and Aeolian harps and energy. And I don't know, I'm at the beginning of this and I just need to figure it out.
Well, although nonfiction, but it's also romantic, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So how about you, Rosin?
I love both these ideas so much. They sound so interesting. Also, I'm picturing a man with a house with Aeolian harps just on every outdoor like window and chimes, infernal but beautiful, eternal chimes at all times. I am well, I'm starting an essay, but I am also working on a novel, but it has an essay in the middle of it.
Okay.
The protagonist of it writes, she's a journalist, and in the middle of the book, the novel pauses and it becomes an essay exploring the themes which have emerged from the plot. The theme is the doppelganger. So it's all about doubles across different folk traditions, world religions, popular culture, authors who saw them. I think Shelley saw his doppelganger. In fact, he saw it twice. And the last time it was pointing out to sea, and it was 1 month before his death. But so for the last year, I've become really obsessed with this idea of what the doppelganger represents and why it's a thing of fear, when actually what it proposes is the opportunity for self-acceptance. But surely the most horrifying thing is to see oneself from outside. But also when you think about like mental health, for instance, we are so much crueler to ourselves than we are to other people. And what if we saw ourselves as we saw another person? What questions might that raise? I'm very influenced by films, actually, more than books, even for this. My first book opened with a line from a David Cronenberg film from Videodrome. And my second one opens with a reference to Dead Ringers, which is his film with a double, with twins as the lead role. And I'm really influenced by another film as well, Possession, set in Berlin. It's a doppelganger horror film from the, I think, 80s. But I've had a lot of fun exploring this kind of the uncanny and the strange, and getting to write an essay as well as a novel, which is again me kind of playing around with form. Hopefully it gets published and it isn't too weird for public consumption.
Oh, you will. You will. Definitely. Definitely. I think this maybe by now is the most interesting question by now. Yeah. Okay. Before we go to the next question, please allow me to share on behalf of One Way Street Journal that the current call for papers of the 150 or so submissions we received, just less than 20 were nonfiction papers. And this is the smallest proportion. And most of them were about personal life, such as hometown, your family memories, personal life diaries, or travel records, or crude character writing, just listing events. And a few are about the COVID pandemic, about recording the changes and warmth of ordinary people, of ordinary life under the pandemic. Generally speaking, these contributions lack observation of social problems, or they just only stay in focus in observation without questioning or reflection. But, as for nonfiction writing, we need more than just observation and recording. We need deeper questioning. We need more some kind of intellectual extension. We need to connect social issues to our personal experience. So our next question will be, as a creator, how do you connect personal experience with social issues? Yeah, maybe it's a difficult question, but I think this is a good question. How do you connect personal experience with social issues? Yeah, different aspects, but I think maybe it's a core. Yeah. So you maybe needed a little time to think about that. So I can give you. Okay,
I'll give it a go in a short way. Just speaking of Janet Malcolm,
okay.
I think she said, I believe something like the I in nonfiction is just as made up as any character in a novel. There's like the way that the first person is conceived and constructed is a myth. It's fiction. And I think that question of the more time I spend writing nonfiction, the more I realize that the function that the personal plays is often formal and aesthetic more than ethical. Potentially the most ethical way to approach nonfiction writing is to evacuate yourself from it altogether. That's a kind of, I'll just leave it at that. It's an abstract answer, but I think it's a very difficult question. But basically, the more time I spend working in this form, the more I realize that the answer to that question is probably more formal than it is ethical or moral, potentially.
Yeah, impressive. I agree with you. So how about you? You just answered, or you just need a little time to think about that? I think this is maybe a little conceptual question.
No, actually, it's interesting because I agree with you guys so much that perhaps the best way is kind of separate yourself. But at the same time, I see the strength and the power in the written word. And therefore, I want to be subjective. I want to be specific. I want to be moral and question all these things within my work. Because for me, like I said, like some of the things that I am exploring through my work, one of them, two of them are social justice and gender parity. And these things also inform my political views, the way I move in the world. I consider myself a feminist, and I understand the position that I occupy now in relation to my mother, to my grandmother, to her grandmother. And I see the ability to point things out and say, hey, this is different, this is wrong. And I see that that's what's the possibility within my work. And so I do bring in my political views within my work. And so for me, I don't know, I can't quite separate myself. And also I've seen like the power of the work in what is this term? Historical revisionism, where you kind of take kind of received truths or ideas of the past and kind of frame them afresh and say, hey, what if we saw these events or these ideas within a very new lens? What could we learn from it? What could happen? And one of the best examples of this, well, maybe there are two, let's see. One of them is in 2019, Chimurenga, which is a journal based in South Africa, incredible journal. Please look it up. They published the Chronic, and they had they focused on this time was new cartographies. So imagining the borders of African countries divided in new ways. What would that provide? What would we see? And they created 8 maps. Okay, I'll write for you in the comment section, Oscar. And they created 8 new maps, and one was built on water conflicts. Other one was built on social orders of the past. Another one was on military networks, and all these ideas that were dismissed long time ago in the scramble of Africa, and imagine what these countries ought to look like, what this continent ought to look like. And for me, that's what creative nonfiction can offer, this great opportunity to take a lens and sit down and look at these things and say, I think they could be different. Another example, a more recent one, I think, is the 1619 project, which came out, I think, about a couple of years ago. And it was commemorating the 400th anniversary of the first slaves arriving in the Americas. And what that project ended up doing was, of course, inflaming many people, because they were forced to see the truth of the history of Black people in their country, and tracing this very clear thread across time, and to show that nothing has really changed. So for me, I think it's very important that you kind of come into this work with the things that fuel you, the things that are important to you, and kind of point this wonderful machine towards things that are important. So yeah, so I do agree with you guys that sometimes it's good to kind of let go and just write, but sometimes it's a very powerful tool, and I like to remember that all the time in the work that I do.
Yeah, thank you for your sharing. It's I agree with you, every word. So how about you, Rosie? So do you have your answer?
I have only more questions, but yeah, this question is really making me realize the limits of my own experience here, because I have only really, I've done journalism and then I've done my literary writing, and I feel like there's quite a clear line between them. And the literary writing is roughly half personal experience and half looking outwards. And I feel like the two bolster each other, the two actually strengthen each other. Sorry, but I think I went into that project, writing The Disconnect, with a kind of faith that I was a microcosm of broader issues. There are obviously other experiences which are completely different to my own, and I try to acknowledge those, but also not speak for them. And, you know, just give them their place, but also give them their room, people to tell their own stories, which are different to mine. But it was also a kind of airing of the dark recesses of my mind, where things had become really tangled up around this issue of just the internet, how the internet was affecting my life. And I wanted to go about it with a kind of faith that I could reach out a hand and someone else would understand too. Yeah, there is a kind of symbiosis there. And I think that kind of writing that I've been talking about, where, you know, you can look inward and you can look outward, is, I think, more honest in my experience than the more straightforwardly classical objective journalism that I did for years before that. I think I'm actually telling a fuller picture now by bringing myself into the story. And I guess that's the spirit of kind of new journalism, and where that's going now. And I wouldn't want to take it to too subjective a place and believe that my story was more important than other people's. But I do think that it's an attempt to transcend that idea that is in the Janet Malcolm, that the I is a construct. I don't believe I know the whole of myself. I learn about myself from writing, but I also hopefully am able to get past that kind of my own experience and try to connect it to others as well. That's been really important in everything I've done so far.
Okay, thank you. And this reminds me that I have another question just jump out. I mean, I wonder, could you tell me I mean, three of you, do you have any personal confusion about your own, how to say, your personal experience connected with this world? I mean, this outside world. I mean, this must be some kind of motivation for your writing. No matter you write nonfiction writing or fiction writing or journalism things, do you have any personal confusion, such as your values? Yeah, some kind of that. I'm very curious about this question. Do we have?
Yeah, let me go first, and
Okay.
I'm curious to hear what the rest will think. So for many years, like I said, I've been working as a journalist for the last 8 years, and during the pandemic, I became conscious of how extractive the work is, in the sense that I approach someone and have all the tools to get them to be very calm around me and to give me their entire life, or because you have to kind of ask many other questions alongside the specific things that you're looking for. So somebody gives you all this stuff, and then you go write an article, condense and write their life through your perspective, through the choices that you make, and then you make the money from it. And during the pandemic, it was quite evident. So luckily for me, and maybe it was true for the others, during the pandemic, when everybody was shutting down, the journalists were still making money, because people were asking how people coping with the pandemic. There was space for us to continue making money and kind of being in the world. And I had been assigned to write an article about this really flamboyant drag king. And the idea of drag kings and drag queens and the queer culture in this part of the world especially is it's quite difficult to navigate for the individuals who identify and actually are public in their presentation of themselves. So, the question about identity before, I'm like, I get it so much. So anyway, so I wrote this article about this drag king and this flamboyant character, and they did all these things. And then I remembered that. And then I saw, I think a couple of days later, how there was fundraising happening for all the people out of work. And I was, because I understand the intersectionality of all the issues that we are affected by, I said, thinking for the first time, like, whoa, all this work that I'm doing about these people who are stuck in their homes, worried about the future, and here I am writing, about all the work that they're doing, and I'm getting published. And it became such a profound question, because within journalism, you're taught that when you interview a person, don't pay them, don't pay a source, let them tell, don't bias the information that they give you with a payment. But I became very conscious of the fact that I'm not quite sure that this is exactly the best way to go about it. And so from that point on, I became quite clear that this thing that I am doing, it can't be extractive. It cannot be something that I gain the most of. I mean, the person, of course, has their name in the print and has a story, and they can use it in the world, but it became very important that I wasn't 100% extractive in the work that I was doing. And so now, because I say I have now entered my artist era, and so I'm looking at my writing as an artistic engagement, and therefore I want it to be kind of like almost a trade. And if at one point the thing that I can offer them is money, great, I will offer them a portion of my fees in some regard after the fact. Or when I am meeting with them, I'm coming with something, I'm coming with some shopping, I'm doing something. So I'm not fully just coming in, taking and leaving, because that is the same criticism I have for all the other areas in my life where I'm like, oh yeah, the government is very extractive in the way that they engage with us. And I mean, like, capitalism as the system that we all are living under is very extractive. And I was like, I don't want to continue being a part of that. And I feel like that is within my control. And so far, it's been really, really rewarding. I feel like I've not been as bad as I was before, bad, quote unquote. Yeah. So that's one of the things I've been contending with and purposefully changing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing your confusion. So do you have your own personal confusion depending on our topic? Yeah. Do you have? Oscar? It seems that you are just a meditation, something.
I'm very interested in Wanjeri's answer. It's this question of what you're actually doing for someone when you write their story is one that I've grappled with a lot and still feel unresolved about. I think that you know, there have been times where I've written a story and one of the sources has been really upset with how they've been presented, not because anything was not factual, but I think because as Wanjeri says, having your life condensed and framed by someone else is sometimes a very exposing feeling. And there is a sense of, yeah, being exposed or misinterpreted, even if the person has done it with as much goodwill as possible. For me, I feel like that's kind of, yeah, it's definitely makes me feel conflicted about my work, 100%. One thing that I guess that I agree in relation to is that sometimes when you're coming up as a journalist, you're taught to be objective. You're taught, like, definitely don't pay for anything for the source, because then they might tell you things that they wouldn't have otherwise. But some editors will even tell you not to be friendly with sources, not to give too much of yourself away. That to me is something that's never sat right at all. I think that particularly if I'm writing a long story, I will always offer a lot of myself to the person and tell them about where I'm from, where my family's from, what my story is, because to try and, like, it does seem like a pretty pernicious power dynamic to come into a relationship from this position of power where you don't have to give anything away and someone is giving everything to you in return. That has always just made me at a human level feel extremely uncomfortable, and I'm incapable of doing that. And in my experience, the times that people have felt most comfortable with how I've portrayed them in stories is when I have actually created the strongest friendship with them. And the times when people have felt maybe upset is when they felt like they don't know me, and so they don't know why I'm interpreting their story in the way that I am. So that's, yeah, but I every day feel conflicted about what I do, but I guess it's just part of it.
Oh, thank you. It's touching. I think it's touching. So yeah, thank you for sharing this for us. So how about you, Rosin?
It's kind of what you guys are talking about reminds me of late last year. I did an interview with the Irish writer Edna O'Brien, who's now in her 80s. I think she's got about like 5 decades of writing behind her. And she was bringing out a new play. And in the interview, she said, an author is always a bit of a traitor to the reality all around them. And she was talking about her own life and how she feels like she has to withdraw and kind of live by herself and afford herself space and time. But also then when you are just in everyday reality, you're always that double agent, aren't you? And that's true of, I mean, she's writing novels, but and plays, and she's written all sorts of things. But I mean, I think that's it's very, very true of nonfiction. I've had this strange experience in recent years of, I'm in a relationship with another writer, and I've appeared in his work, and he's appeared in mine. I put him in my book as a kind of offstage you. I addressed it to him, one of the chapters, and I didn't show it to him before it was going to press, because I thought his influence would be so outsized, because this is someone I care about so much. I couldn't afford to let another person in on something like my first book, you know, which I know a lot of other writers who have a very different approach and they show it to people. But I just think you don't know the consequences of your own writing for others or for yourself until after the fact, and it changes over time too, and that's just the risk we have to run. And really it teaches you, it has its limits, but it teaches you intuition. If you know yourself and you know your motives and you're being honest with yourself at the time, then hopefully you will reach something that you can live with, than being on the internet forever and being in a bookshop. And like, I'm not certain, I can't even bring myself to talk about it with them, but I don't think my parents have read my book, and I'm not sure if they should either. And I wouldn't want to pressure them into it, because it's a side of me and a world as well that maybe they shouldn't see. And then last year, my cousin brought out a book, and I know for a fact that it's all about her struggle with an eating disorder, as well as other things. But she said online that she didn't want family to read it. So I followed her wishes. I have a lot of writing that I don't know if it's that I'm not proud of it, but like, I wouldn't want it to be held up as typical of what I produce. But then isn't that just the way that we change? We are people who change. I think the culture we're in right now doesn't always allow for that, even though it's happening to all of us all the time. Our opinions change, our outlook changes, experiences change us, writing changes us. We just have to do our best. And I think we have to go about it in good faith. That's all we can do. But I have to say, like, I love this question because the problems are what motivates me. I write about things where I haven't formed my opinion yet. And a kind of, if something troubles me, then I know it's worth writing about, usually.
Okay, thank you. Yes, definitely. I think this problem of ourselves is definitely the motivation of for our writing. So let's go to our last question of today's topic. And what role does nonfiction writing play in exploring social issues? I mean, historical, cultural, or identical social issues. In my opinion, nonfiction writing is closer to social issues than fiction writing. This means that the expression of novels and poems, they cannot be directly involved in society. However, due to the specialty of the subject matter, nonfiction writing can think about social reality in a more direct way. But however, this direct is not a guiding or preaching or propaganda expression, of course. And instead, it means that nonfiction writing should provide more, my own opinion, okay? Should provide more intellectual space for thinking about social problems, a kind of extensile or more concise observation. And whether the social issues is about what kind of problem, historical or cultural or other things, I think nonfiction writing should have a certain, how to say it, hardcore, an intellectual hardcore. That is the most important aspect for me for writing a nonfiction. So how about your opinions about this question? What role does nonfiction writing play in exploring social issues?
I was thinking about this from, I think, something Oscar had said before about being a consumer of this text. So I'm removing myself as the writer because I know that I'm very subjective in how I write things, but I'm thinking about texts that I've read that has really moved me and made me think about things in a different perspective. And I think that's the amazing thing that creative nonfiction can do, because it's fact told in an interesting way. So not like, the boring text that we encounter when we're doing our research. I think Riesling talked about that. But text that is so moving in an argument that you perhaps starting out had completely a different perspective. Like you were sure, I know. And then you read a piece of text and it completely shifts your perspective, changes your entire understanding and realm of possibility of what else can be found. Now, I was trying to remember the text that I had read, and I think what comes to mind actually is a very strange documentary that I watched, and it was on men activists. It was women who were no longer identified as feminists, and they were advocates for men. And going in, I was like, oh my God, it's going to be some nonsense arguments and I'm just going to be angry at the end of it. But actually, I left there being very sympathetic, understanding something that had been presented. Yes, there were things that I was disagreeing with, but there was lots more for me to learn. And that's what I think is a strength of an essay, or in this case, it was a video essay, and it presented very soberly another perspective that was so different from mine and allowed me to understand something that I had preconceived notions about. So I think that's for me the strength of what the work can do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So what's your opinion about this question? Rosin or Oscar? Okay, who also lady first, okay?
Will I go?
Okay.
I think I think all writers work with an eye to history. And I think on some level, we all wish to transcend our own mortality, don't we? We want to live forever. Well, I know I do, as a brain in a jar. No, but I think what's fascinating is like when you consider what nonfiction writing can do in a historical context, like even times not that far that back in the past, they feel so removed from us. And we have this tendency, I think, in the brain to simplify everything. And then when you read nonfiction, it's never going to give us the whole of the picture, but it's going to give us something more holistic and more human. And it can give us the human story of things which get flattened then into history books. I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is The Pillow Book, which gets called like the first example of kind of creative nonfiction. It's like a diary of a woman in, I think it's like the year 700, but I'm not sure. I closed my internet window. I was going to Google it to get the exact year. And I won't pronounce her name correctly, but it's Sei Sonegen. And it's like these fragments of just everyday life in a book that a woman who's a court lady in Japan, in the court of the emperor, was just sneakily writing and stashing, I think, under her pillow, which is where the name comes from. And it's so startlingly human. I mean, to read that it's very validating as a writer of nonfiction in a sense, because it's like, I can create something more human than any other means, really. And I really strongly believe this is why AI won't replace this either, because what is it like that draws us to writing that we love? It's that we're spending time with a voice of someone interesting, of an outlook in the world, even if that voice, that person attached to that voice is removed from the writing in as much as they can be. It's still a fundamentally human experience, and it's a kind of communion with the world. So that, I think that's what nonfiction has. I think it's been fascinating over the last year or two, because I've been trying to write both. I'm writing fiction and I'm writing nonfiction. And I really have arrived at a place of believing that fiction is like a dream. It's like the sort of dream layer on top of reality where the thought doesn't have to be finished. And then I have this other part of like essay brain still going in my head where you have to ruthlessly analyze and draw conclusions. And you almost have to go like the meme, like the galaxy brain. You have to just branch outward and outward and find all the connections and the meaning. And you have to do what you can in the time, and maybe your opinion will change later. Both, I think, are utterly in dialogue with social issues, but in very different ways. And I wouldn't want to like turn to fiction for everything, for the truth. But I would likewise approach nonfiction with a pinch of salt as something more human than anything else, I think.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Very impressive again. So what about you, Oscar? What's your understanding? Okay.
I agree with a lot of what's just been said. I think that for me, as someone I'm a book person. I've just learned about the world through books. I've learned about perspectives different from my own. I've learned about places that I've never been and never will be. I've learned about history. Everything has come to me through books. So, you know, I'm created by nonfiction, my worldview, everything, most things that I know created through what I read. And so in that sense, I mean, the power of nonfiction in interacting with social issues that's kind of what it's there for. But recently I've kind of been, I think, honestly, because of all this AI discourse and kind of playing with ChatGPT, and you know, I know a little bit about that space because of the dissertation that I wrote. It was the first time that I really was like, when ChatGPT came out, I was really like, I'm not an alarmist. I don't buy into the hype, but I was like, this is like kind of freaky. This is really good. And it's, as a book person and as a text person, it was kind of like a moment of like slight existential terror. But the thing that, and this is similar to what Roshin was saying, what I've become more attracted to in nonfiction writing, both as a writer and as a reader, is just the really old school practice of reportage just someone going out somewhere with a notebook and seeing what they see, having the conversations that they have, and then telling you about it after. It's like the most simple form of nonfiction writing. It's not data oriented. It's not like synthesizing vast swathes of information. It's not necessarily even making a compelling argument. It's just someone who goes out, these things, and reports back. And that to me is like, obviously the most simple form of nonfiction writing, but also potentially the most interesting future for it, because it is someone going out and interacting with the world. And when you do that, you inevitably interact with the social fabric that we live in. You inevitably bring your own history and backstory to bear on the world. And it's like that, it's that meeting of the individual and the world that makes the most interesting nonfiction writing, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. Thank you for three of you. I think we just spent our wonderful, productive 90 minutes together in discuss this topic, where to search for true oral stories. Maybe you have more inspiration after this topic. I hope so. So we are just at the end of our discussion today, and it's nearly about 90 minutes. So thank you again for sharing us your very, very vivid and interesting opinions about this topic. Okay, so while we are excited, very weird.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. This has been really, really enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think our discussion is quite be productive. Yeah, I'm satisfied with today's outcome of this topic, and thank you for your inspiration, for your understanding of this 5 or more questions about that. And I hope one day you can have your own masterpiece of nonfiction.